So you're doing an LSAT logical reasoning section and you come across an argument that looks straightforward. It says something like the following, quote, "If someone completes a marathon, then they trained for months beforehand. Jordan completed a marathon last weekend, therefore Jordan must have trained for months beforehand." Now, if you're scoring in the 150s or the low 160s, your brain probably goes into checklist mode. You start diagramming. You write out M arrow T, marathon arrow training. Marathon happened, so training happened. Then you think, okay, this matches, seems valid, but wait, is there a trap here? Should I look for a flaw just in case? So you start second guessing, checking every answer choice like you're defusing a bomb. That's normal, and honestly, at the beginning of your LSAT prep, that's probably what you should be doing. But if you want to go from 170 to 175, 178, or even 180, this has to change because top scorers aren't going to diagram that. They don't write anything down. They don't pause and go, let me make sure I'm not getting tricked. They just see it. They read the argument and they instantly understand the structure. And more importantly, they know what to ignore. They know this isn't a trap question. It's just a basic valid argument using a conditional and a clear application of the rule. No need to reinvent the wheel. No need to stare at the ceiling wondering if this is a trick. That's the first shift you need to make if you want to hit a 180. You've got to move from calculated reasoning to intuitive reasoning. Now, I want to be really clear here. Intuitive does not mean guessing. It doesn't mean skipping steps. It just means the steps have been internalized. Imagine you're trying to recognize your friend's face in a crowd. You don't mentally go, okay, what shape is their nose? What color are their eyes? What's their average height? You just know it's them. That's the same feeling top scorers develop with LSAT structure. When they see a circular argument, they don't need to say, yes, this is begging the question. They just feel the circularity of the reasoning. Now let's flip that for a second. Let's say you're still scoring in the low 170s and you come across this argument. Quote, "Studies show that people who meditate daily have lower blood pressure. Therefore, the best way to reduce blood pressure is to meditate." Your first instinct might be to say, that makes sense. Or you might think, let me check all 5 choices carefully. I don't want to miss something. But someone aiming for a 180, they immediately go, that's a correlation causation flaw. The argument assumes that meditation causes the drop in blood pressure, but it never rules out other explanations. They don't analyze it like it's new. They've seen this logic structure 300 times, and the moment they see it again, they respond instantly because the pattern is familiar. It's the difference between looking at individual puzzle pieces versus recognizing the shape of the missing corner and knowing exactly what to plug in. And that's what this is all about, building what I call structural fluency. Structural fluency is when you've done so many questions and reviewed them properly that you stop reacting like it's a pop quiz and start treating it like a predictable game. It's not magic. It's not about being born good at logic. It's just repetition, targeted review, and eventually dropping the training wheels. You stop diagramming every conditional statement. You stop saying, wait, is this a flaw question or a weakened question? You just get it. And here's the key. That doesn't happen by trying to logic harder. It happens when you stop approaching every question like it's brand new and start seeing the sameness beneath the surface. Most students stay in calculation mode far too long because it feels safe. You can write everything out. You can show your work. You can justify your process. But a 180 scorer, they've moved past that. They've built so much accuracy over time that their speed isn't from rushing, it's from not needing to pause at all. So if you're still relying on brute force logic to get through every question, here's your takeaway. Yes, that approach will get you to 165 or 170, but it's not going to take you to 180. Because the final leap isn't about learning more content. It's about developing trust in your instincts and earning that trust through deep, intentional, pattern-driven review. That's how you stop solving each puzzle piece by piece and start completing the picture before most people even find the edges. Now let's play a quick game. I'm going to describe the topic of a logical reasoning argument, and I want you to guess what the argument's about. Ready? Quote, a marine biologist studying the nesting patterns of sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico finds that older turtles tend to nest earlier in the season than younger turtles. Now pause. You might be thinking, oh, this is going to be about turtle behavior. Or maybe this is a science passage about aging. Nope, it's about logic and structure. See, one of the biggest traps students fall into, especially advanced students, is getting caught up in what the question's about instead of how the argument is built. A 150 scorer gets distracted by the subject matter. A 170 scorer notices the argument style. But a 180 scorer, they don't even remember the topic by the time they get to the choices. Let me say that again. Top scorers forget the content almost immediately because it's not relevant. It doesn't matter. They don't care if the stimulus is about turtles, tax law, or toaster ovens. They're not thinking, I've never seen this before. They're thinking, oh, classic generalization flaw, or, yep, here comes the conditional bait and switch. That's why it's all about structure over content, because the content is designed to distract you. The LSAT knows that if it throws in some spicy new topic, rare medical treatments, alternative energy sources, archaeological digs, your brain might freeze and go, wait, do I need to know this? You don't. And they're counting on that hesitation. But here's what top scorers know. There are only so many ways to build an argument, and even fewer ways to flaw one. And that's your edge. Let me give you a quick example that proves the point. Imagine the argument says, quote, several critics have praised the film's soundtrack, and a few even called it revolutionary. Therefore, the film is likely to win Best Picture at the upcoming awards ceremony. Now, if you focus on the topic, movies, awards, music, you're already off track. But if you focus on the structure, you spot the flaw instantly. They're assuming that praise for one aspect of the film means the whole film is award-worthy. That's a classic part-to-whole flaw. And we've seen that structure in questions about businesses, city policies, even animal biology. The topic changes, but the logic doesn't. And that's why so many smart students plateau. They keep reacting to each stimulus like it's new. They think, well, I've never seen a question about electric scooter rental markets before. I'd better slow down. Meanwhile, a top scorer reads that and thinks, oh, this is just another flawed analogy wrapped in a trendy topic. Let's go. And then they're on to the next one. So here's the shift you need to make. When you read an LSAT argument, your job isn't to understand the story, it's to map it. Ask yourself, what's the conclusion? What's the support? What logic connects them? And is that connection valid? Or does it rely on a flawed assumption? That's it. Whether the argument's about ancient Roman aqueducts or modern healthcare spending doesn't matter. Strip it down, see the skeleton, and don't get distracted by the disguise. One of my students told me they were stuck at a 172 for months, and the only thing they changed was this. They started reading every logical reasoning question as if the topic didn't matter. And once they did that, their timing improved, their accuracy improved, and they finally hit 178. And of course, your results may vary. Every student's journey is unique. I only share this example to illustrate the point that when you focus on content, every question feels unique. But when you focus on structure, you realize you've already seen this question before, just with different window dressing. And that changes everything. Let's talk about something that separates high scorers from elite scorers. It's not logical reasoning. It's not reading comp. It's not even whether you diagram conditional statements. It's whether you're reacting or anticipating. Let me show you what I mean. Many LSAT students approach every question like it's a brand new puzzle. They read the stimulus, then they go one by one through the choices. They'll think A, maybe, B, interesting, C, possibly stronger. Then they circle back to A, then B, then C again. Now they're second guessing everything. Sound familiar? Now let me show you how a 180 scorer handles the same question. They read the stimulus, and while they're reading, they're already predicting what type of wrong answers are coming. They're thinking, oh, this argument concludes that X caused Y. Probably going to be a strengthen or weaken question. I bet one trap will suggest a reverse causation. Another might add a new variable. Then they scan the answers, not as 5 brand new ideas, but as 5 attempts by the LSAT to play a trick they've seen 100 times. It's not which of these answers is right, it's which of these traps is the LSAT trying to bait me with today. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you get a question like this, quote, after the city switched to LED streetlights, nighttime crime dropped by 15%. Therefore, switching to LED lights causes a reduction in crime. Now pause. A lot of students will think, well, that seems logical. Crime dropped. New lights were added. Maybe there's a connection. So they go into the choices with their guard down. But the 180 scorer, they immediately know what's coming. This is a correlation causation setup. So they're already expecting choices like one that suggests another factor reduced crime, like increased police patrols, one that says a similar city installed LEDs and crime didn't drop, and one that says crime was already trending downward before the lights went in. In other words, they know the playbook. They're not reacting. They're waiting for the test to make a move they saw coming 10 seconds ago. And when the LSAT does, they're gonna be ready. It's like when you're playing chess and your opponent opens with a move you've practiced responses for 100 times. You don't pause and think, oh no, what now? You just respond. Now, how do you build this type of anticipation? Simple. You don't just drill questions, you drill traps. You study every wrong answer, not just to say why it's wrong, but to say, what type of wrong is this? Where else have I seen this pattern? What would this answer look like in a different topic, different context? Because here's the truth. The LSAT isn't creative. It's consistent. The test makers are clever, but they're not writing brand new traps every single time. They're recycling old tricks with new costumes. So once you know what the traps look like, you start to see them everywhere. And instead of being the one falling for them, you're the one calling them in advance. So if you've ever said, I always fall for those tempting wrong answers, that's not a weakness, it's a signal. It means your pattern recognition hasn't caught up yet. But the moment it does, you'll stop getting tricked. You'll start getting faster, and you'll walk into every question not wondering what's coming, but spotting it before it even shows up. That's how top scorers think. Now let me ask you something. When you do a logical reasoning section, do you ever feel like you're doing too much? Maybe underlining, highlighting, or writing out contrapositives like it's a high school geometry proof? You get to the choices and suddenly you've got arrows everywhere and a scratch paper full of notes that look like a conspiracy board. Now, that's not wrong, but in fact, when you first started learning this stuff, that kind of meticulous approach is actually necessary. But if you're already now scoring in the 160s or 170s and you're still doing that, it might be slowing you down more than it's helping. Because here's what top scorers do differently. They're casual, but they're precise. Let me explain what that means. When a 180 scorer reads an argument, they're not taking 5 steps just to understand what's going on. They're not diagramming every single sentence or writing C equals conclusion on their scratch paper. They're reading it once, carefully, but without tension. And in that single read, they already know, here's the main point, that's the support, here's the assumption, got it, likely a flaw or weaken. They don't pause and say those things out loud, of course. They just absorb it. It's fast, it's smooth, it's automatic. And they're not rushing either. They're confident because they've done the hard work already. Let me give you an example. Suppose you had an argument that says, quote, surveys show that people who eat breakfast regularly tend to report higher levels of energy throughout the day. Therefore, eating breakfast increases your energy. Now, a student stuck at 165 might underline breakfast, energy, surveys, and maybe even diagram the whole thing. But a 180 scorer? They skim once and immediately think, classic correlation causation. Let's find a choice that either strengthens or challenges that assumption. They don't need to write it down because they've seen this structure so many times that their brain just knows what to look for. They're casual, but they never miss the main idea. They're precise without being robotic. That's what I mean by casual precision. Now, here's what's tricky. Most students think being precise means being slow, or being overly thorough, or covering every possibility before choosing an answer. But true precision is being able to cut straight to what matters and ignoring everything else. It's skipping the filler. It's knowing which lines are set up and which lines are bait. It's seeing the logical skeleton without wasting time on decoration. Think about it like this. A rookie chef follows the recipe to the letter, but a pro chef knows when to improvise, when to season by feel, and when to trust experience. Same thing on the LSAT. A 150 scorer follows the checklist: ID conclusion, ID premises, find the assumption, eliminate wrong answers, reread, and panic. But a 180 scorer already knows the move, and they do it with calm, focused efficiency. So if you find yourself over-annotating or feeling like you have to logic your way through every line, ask yourself, am I using notes as a crutch, or have I trained myself to see what matters without needing to write it all down? Because here's the truth. By the time you're pushing for 175 or higher, you don't have time to write out every step. You've got to read clearly, think sharply, and move quickly. Not rushed, but with calm, deliberate momentum. That's casual precision, and it's one of the biggest differences between someone who's good at the LSAT and someone who owns it. Now let's talk about one of the most common traps even for high scorers. It's the difference between what's on the page and what's in your head. Because, let's be honest, sometimes you read an LSAT argument and before you've even finished the last sentence, your brain goes, oh, I know where this is going. Wait, I've seen this argument before. It's just like that one from Prep Test 42. Or, I bet the answer is going to involve X, Y, or Z. So you skim the choices, latch onto the one that feels close to what you expected, and then, a few minutes later, you're staring at the correct answer D thinking, wait, what? But mine sounded so good. Exactly. It sounded good, but it wasn't actually supported by the argument. And that's where top scorers are ruthless. They don't guess what the author meant. They don't imagine hidden context. They don't add things just because they feel reasonable. They read what's there, nothing more, nothing less. Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose the argument says, quote, the local council recently passed a new noise ordinance that lowers acceptable decibel levels during nighttime hours. After the law passed, residents reported getting better sleep. Therefore, the noise ordinance is improving public health. Now, this sounds nice. Sleep is better. Health is better. Law, therefore, is a success. But hold up. Did the argument actually prove that the noise ordinance caused the health benefit, or did it assume it? And more importantly, did the argument give us any direct evidence about improved health outcomes? Not really. It gave us one thing: people reporting better sleep. That's it. There is a huge logical leap happening. But if you're too focused on what makes sense, you're going to fill in the gap yourself. You'll go, well, yeah, sleep is good for health. Everybody knows that. But the LSAT doesn't care what everyone knows. It only cares what's in the argument. And this right here is one of the biggest reasons people miss questions they should get right. They add assumptions. They insert logic. They do the test's job for it. It's like reading a contract and thinking, well, I'm sure they meant to include that clause. Nope. If it's not written down, it doesn't count. Top scorers treat every argument like it's a contract. They look for what is explicitly stated. They don't interpret, they don't assume, and they don't project. They treat the argument like it's literal because it is. Now, this gets tricky when you're tired or under time pressure. That's when your brain wants shortcuts. It wants to recognize patterns quickly and leap to conclusions. And sometimes that works. But when it doesn't, it costs you the point. So here's a simple exercise you can start using today. Next time you miss a question, don't just ask, why was this wrong? Ask, what did I add that wasn't actually in the stimulus? That question alone will fix so many silent score killers, because half the time you didn't miss the question, you just imagined the wrong version of it. And once you start catching that, you're going to start reading more slowly, more literally, and more strategically. And the LSAT will finally stop tricking you with what feels right, but isn't actually written. That's the discipline that gets you from a 172 to a 178. Now let's talk about something almost nobody covers when it comes to hitting 175 and above. It's not logic, it's not strategy, it's not even timing. It's endurance, the ability to focus, stay sharp, and make high-level decisions for 2.5 straight hours under pressure. Because here's the reality. You can be a genius in section 1 and be a disaster in section 4. And the LSAT doesn't care that you got a perfect 26 out of 26 on your first logical reasoning section if your reading comp collapsed into guesswork because your brain checked out halfway through the third passage. I can't tell you how many students come to me and say, Steve, I was scoring 176 on my practice tests at home, but on test day I got a 167. I don't know what happened. The thing is, you do know what happened. You got tired. You lost focus. Your brain ran out of fuel. And that's not a character flaw, it's a training issue. Because most people only train for accuracy. They drill individual questions in sections. They time themselves and they review their mistakes. All good things. But they never train for mental stamina. And that's a huge problem. Because the LSAT isn't testing whether you can think clearly for 35 minutes. It's testing whether you can think clearly for 2.5 hours across multiple sections while the clock is ticking, while the pressure is mounting, and while your inner voice is whispering, you're fading, you're behind, you're blowing it. Top scorers don't just master the content. They master the conditions. And that means training in a way that reflects the actual experience of test day. Now here's what that looks like in practice. You take full-length practice tests regularly, not just 1 or 2, at least 5 or 6 in the month leading up to your official exam. You simulate test day conditions, same time of day, same rules, same breaks. You don't pause the timer just for a second because someone rang the doorbell. And you practice focusing when you don't feel like it, because that's exactly what the real exam will demand. Now here's another key detail that top scorers know. Your decision making gets worse when you're tired. You start second guessing. You reread too much. You misread question stems. And even though it feels like you're trying just as hard, the quality of your thinking starts to slip. The fix is to build your mental endurance before test day. Push through full-length exams, not just to check your score, but to track your focus. Ask yourself after each one, when did I start to fade? Which section felt the sloppiest? Was I still making sharp decisions by section 4? Then you train for that. If reading comp always falls apart at the end, maybe your next practice test starts with it instead of ends with it. And if you feel mentally foggy halfway through, don't blame yourself, just adjust your routine. Sleep better, eat better, time your caffeine smarter. Take practice tests when your brain feels heavy, not just when it feels fresh. Because test day doesn't care how you're feeling. You've got to be ready whether you're in the zone or you're running on fumes. And that's why endurance is such a powerful edge. Everybody studies the material, but only a few train for the full experience. And those who do, they don't fade, they don't panic, they close strong. They walk into the last section knowing, this is where I gain ground, and this is where I leave everyone else behind. Now let's talk about vibes for a second. And I know that vibes sounds like a soft sort of skill, something motivational, something that might belong on a sticky note, not a test of logic. But the truth is, a 180 just feels different. Not because the test is magically easier for top scorers, but because they've trained their brains to stay calm. And that calm is not luck. It's a function of strategy. Let me show you how it works. You're in section 3 of your exam. You've already burned through 1 logical reasoning and 1 reading comp. You're tired. There's a weird question at number 17 that uses words you've never seen outside of a philosophy journal, and the clock says you've only got 4 minutes left. This is where most people tighten up. Their thoughts speed up, their logic slows down, and their decisions get sloppy. And their inner monologue kicks in. They're thinking, what if I bomb this section? What if I've been doing worse than I think? What if this ruins everything? And that's where scores drop. Not because you forgot the content, but because your brain switched into panic mode. Now, let's rewind. Same scenario, same question, but you've trained for this. You know what a hard question looks like. You've seen obscure topics before, and you've practiced recovering from fatigue. So instead of panicking, your brain goes, okay, this one's designed to rattle me. Skip it, flag it, move on, and I'll come back later. That is high-level performance. You're calm, you're confident, and you're in control. This is what I mean when I say confidence isn't just a feeling, it's a strategy. Top scorers walk into test day knowing they've trained for chaos. They've taken practice tests with construction noise outside, with their internet glitching, with distractions, fatigue, bad lighting, you name it. And every one of those reps built resilience. So when things don't go perfectly on test day, and spoiler alert, they won't. They don't fall apart. They adjust, they reset, and they stay grounded. Think about elite athletes. The great ones don't need every game to go their way. They expect some friction and they train for it. Same thing on the LSAT. You want to get to 180? You've got to stop relying on ideal conditions. You need to be okay with the fact that some questions will feel impossible in the moment. Some passages are going to be boring, and some sections will feel rough, and you'll still be fine because you've trained yourself not just to know the test, but to handle it. And that confidence shows up in subtle ways. You don't second guess every answer. You don't reread the stimulus 6 times, and you don't freak out when one question doesn't click. Instead, you trust your prep. You stay focused on the section you're in, and you move forward with calm, deliberate momentum. Confidence isn't about thinking you'll get every question right. It's about knowing that even if you don't, you'll still win the section. That's what separates a 173 from a 179. Not skill, not IQ, emotional control. You keep your head while everyone else is spiraling, and that's why vibe matters. Now, let me tell you a secret most LSAT prep companies don't talk about. Even if you've trained hard, even if you've mastered flaw questions, even if you've taken 30 practice tests and memorized every formal logic trap, you're still gonna screw up something on test day. That's not a maybe, that's a guarantee. And what separates top scorers from everyone else isn't that they avoid mistakes, it's that they recover faster. This is called psychological flexibility. It's the ability to shift gears mid-test without melting down. And it might be the most underrated LSAT skill there is. Let me give you a real scenario. You're 7 minutes into your first section. The first 3 questions felt harder than usual. You weren't expecting to struggle that early, and now you're rattled. Your brain starts spiraling. You're thinking to yourself, did I mess up already? Maybe this one was the experimental section? And what if I blew the easy ones? All of that internal noise, that's what kills momentum. And once you start narrating the test in your head like it's a disaster movie, it becomes one. But let's say you've trained for this. You've been here before, on a practice test where the first 3 questions felt weird, but you still pulled out a solid score. You recognize the spiral, and instead of feeding it, you interrupt it. You think, okay, those were tough. Doesn't mean the rest will be. Let's reset. New question, new focus. That's psychological flexibility. You're not ignoring the struggle, but you're managing your response to it. You're choosing how to interpret the moment. Here's the key. Top scorers don't need things to go perfectly. They're not dependent on momentum. They know how to manufacture momentum in the middle of the storm. One of my students told me something that has always stuck with me. He said, the section isn't over until I say that is. he didn't mean that in some cosmic, manifest your destiny kind of way. He meant that even if the first 20 minutes were shaky, he had trained himself to lock in for the final 15. He wasn't waiting for a section to go well. He made it go well by being present, not perfect. That's what 180 scorers do. And look, it's not about faking positivity or telling yourself you're crushing it when you're not. It's about refocusing instead of catastrophizing. If you blank on a reading comp passage, you don't throw the section away. If you misread a question stem in logical reasoning, you don't punish yourself for it. You move, you adjust, you stay in the game. Because this test is as much about emotional agility as it is about logic. So if you're gunning for a top score, don't just practice getting questions right. Practice recovering when you get them wrong. Train yourself to keep your head when things go sideways. Because on test day, they will. And when they do, you'll be ready. Not to panic, but to pivot. That's what separates a great test taker from a world-class one. Now let's talk about review. And let me guess, you finish a practice test, you check your score, you go over the ones you missed, you read the explanation, nod, say, okay, I get it now, and you move on. That's how 95% of people review. And you know what? That's not real review. That's reassurance. You're basically telling yourself, yeah, I would have gotten it if I had a little more time. But that's not how 180 scorers operate. They don't just look at their mistakes, they interrogate them. They don't say, why is the right answer right? They say, what broke down in my process that made the wrong one feel right? Let me walk you through exactly what reviewing like a top scorer looks like. The first step is to reverse engineer the trap. Let's say you chose answer choice B, but the correct answer was D. Don't stop at B was a trap. Ask, what made B feel tempting? What language did it use that made me trust it? What blind spot did it target in my thinking? Every wrong answer is a mirror. It shows you exactly where you're vulnerable. And until you name that vulnerability, you're going to fall for the same trap again. The second step is to generalize the lesson, because once you've spotted the trap, you don't want to leave it there. You ask, what kind of trap was this? Have I seen this in other questions? And how would this same error show up in a completely different topic? Because the LSAT recycles logic constantly. If you just memorize what went wrong in that one question, you're treating the symptom. But if you figure out the type of reasoning that tripped you up, you're treating the disease. 180 scorers keep running logs of these patterns. They name them, they label them, and they develop intuition around them. They don't just get better at that question, they get better at every question that looks like it. Then the third step is to re-answer that question tomorrow. And this is something almost nobody does, but top scorers swear by it. They come back to the question the next day. Don't look at your old notes. Don't peek at the correct answer. Treat it like it's brand new and ask, would I fall for the same trap again? If the answer is yes, you haven't internalized the lesson yet. If the answer is no, you've just built durability. And now that insight lives in your muscle memory, and that's what you want. Because here's the truth. The gap between 170 and 180 is not about getting fewer questions wrong. It's about getting better at learning from every single one. Top scorers don't waste a single missed question. They squeeze every drop of insight from it. They build systems to avoid repeating the same thinking error again. Meanwhile, average scorers are busy saying, I just always fall for those strengthened but not enough answers. Okay, cool. But what are you doing about it? 180 scorers don't accept that as a personality trait. They build a response plan. They name the pattern. They watch for it next time, and they test themselves on it until it becomes instinct. That's the level of discipline we're talking about here. So if you want to start reviewing like a top scorer, stop checking your answers like you're grading a spelling test. Start reviewing like you're studying your own thinking patterns under pressure, because that's exactly what the LSAT is testing. And once you fix your thinking, the right answers take care of themselves.